It is finally race week again. This extended fall break is finally nearing an end, and I have some predictions that I am feeling pretty confident about for the United States Grand Prix at COTA. Let's get into things. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael, and welcome back to Last to First. We are rapidly approaching the end of the season, and with the last 6 races, we actually have 3 of them as sprint weekends, believe it or not. And here at COTA, it is one of those sprint weekends. So let's get into my predictions for sprint qualifying. I'm just going to be doing the top 3 for the sprint qualifying and sprint race, and then I'll do the top 5 for the regular race and the regular qualifying. But getting into sprint qualifying in P3, I have Lando Norris. Now, this year in particular, he hasn't been on top all the time when it comes to sprint qualifying. He only has 1 pole in the sprint, and he typically winds up being a little bit behind Verstappen and just generally behind with the sprint qualifying, having it so early in the weekend. But I think he's still going to be right thereabouts, and it's going to be very close. I think the Mclaren is still, regardless of what other teams are bringing in terms of upgrades, I think it's still going to be either the best or right there at the front of things. P2, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. I think he's going to be on a mission to get back ahead of Norris and really seal the championship sooner rather than later. I think he is tired of having this bad run of form that Red Bull has been in, and they do have some upgrades coming this weekend, so I think that is going to help them a bit. And I think in qualifying, at least in sprint qualifying, he's going to be able to get ahead of Norris to start the weekend out. P1 in sprint qualifying, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. Now, of course, Leclerc is always extremely good at qualifying. He can get on a quick lap immediately, and he has done well in sprint qualifyings in the past. And if we're looking back at last year, he had a great race here at COTA as well before he did get disqualified alongside Hamilton. So that was unfortunate for him, but I think he's going to be able to pull out one of those magic Leclerc laps. Will he be able to hold that on going forward? Is the Ferrari really good enough to be in that position? I'm not so sure, but I think he'll be able to pull out a pole in sprint qualifying. For the sprint race, starting in P3, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. Like I kind of alluded to there previously, I think the car just won't quite be quick enough for him to be able to maintain his position and hold it even in the sprint, which likely, doesn't have any pit stops if all things go according to plan. I think the Ferrari is just going to be slightly behind some of the other teams this weekend, so I think he won't quite be able to hold on to first in the sprint. For P2 in the sprint race, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. I think he's going to lose out at the start, and I think he's just going to be happy to maintain that position throughout the race because he's not going to be too concerned. It's a sprint race. Nobody needs to make any crazy lunges or do any crazy moves, anything that's going to potentially damage their race because there's a lot more points up for grabs. So I think he'll be happy with a P2. And coming ahead of him in P1, I think it'll be Lando Norris. I think McLaren will still probably have the fastest car of the weekend despite any Red Bull or Mercedes upgrades. But I think more importantly in the sprint race, I think Norris will actually get a good start and be able to get ahead of Verstappen, which will then allow him to be able to pass Leclerc later on in the sprint race. And yeah, I think he'll be able to hold on to a charging Verstappen behind, who I think will be quite quick this weekend. But yes, for the sprint race, I'll go with Lando Norris taking it home. Now getting into the more juicy parts of the weekend with traditional qualifying, starting out with P5, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. Despite his recent tough run of qualifying form as of late, he really does love this track. He always excels at it. He was fighting for a win last time out. Had he not got disqualified, he would have had a nice P2 there. And I think even though the Mercedes, I don't think will be the fastest car this weekend, and they do have a lot of upgrades coming, I don't think he'll quite be able to challenge in the top of the grid this time out, but I think he will have a good result in P5. In P4, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. I think he will have a promising sprint race and qualifying, but beyond that, I think the other teams are going to be able to get slightly more out of their cars, more out of the weekend. They're going to learn a bit more and be able to pass Leclerc's very quick initial start. And I think because of that, he's going to wind up in P4 in qualifying. It's going to be close, but I think he's going to be just behind some of the top three. And yeah, I think he just won't quite be fast enough to be able to get into the front row of the grid. P3 in qualifying, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri. I think it's either with him, it kind of seems to be he's either going to be on pole or he's going to be slightly behind the two protagonists of the season in the form of Norris and Verstappen. So I'll be curious to see how things are. He was outshone by Norris last time out, so it will be interesting to see if he is able to bounce back or if he is going to be slightly behind. And I think he is going to be slightly behind this weekend, coming in at P3 in qualifying. P2 in qualifying, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. I think it's going to be ultra close between really the top 4 or 5 cars. I mean, that's just what the season has turned into, crazy enough. And despite some of the teams bringing some upgrades, I don't think it's going to jump, it's not going to vault any of them ahead of one or the other. But yeah, it's just going to be ultra close. I think Verstappen is going to be happy with the P2. I think he's just barely going to lose out in qualifying. And I think he's going to lose out to Lando Norris, who I think will be in P1. And I think he'll just be able to just etch out pole position because I still think the McLaren is going to be the slightly faster car despite Red Bull's upgrades. And I think McLaren is going to be on fire and Norris is going to want to continue to attempt his championship bid. All right, so for the main event of the weekend, the race at the Circuit of the Americas, starting out with P5, I'm actually going to go with George Russell. Mercedes did well here last year, in particular Lewis Hamilton, and they do have another upgrade package coming this weekend, so that's good news for them since they've been not doing so good since the summer break, since they had that nice run of form before the summer break. And Russell did have a tough race last year. He didn't perform nearly as well as Hamilton, but I think overall he's been performing a bit better this year, and I think he's going to have a solid race to bring it home P5. P4, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. Once again, I don't think he'll be fighting for a win like he was last year, despite that big upgrade package from Mercedes, but I think it'll be a good solid result for the two Mercedes drivers. I don't know what they're hoping for with the upgrade package exactly. I haven't heard too much about it. I understand that it is quite a big upgrade package to my knowledge, but I'm still not super convinced that Mercedes really understands exactly what they're doing, exactly the rule set. I'm not sure if they fully are able to put an upgrade on like McLaren was able to and just get a lot of performance out of it. I think they will probably make a step forward. Hopefully they will have a better understanding of things, but they do still seem to be a little lost. So I'm not sure how that upgrade package will go, but I don't think it'll be disastrous from them because I think they still do have a much better understanding than they did last year or the year before, certainly. Next up, P3 in the race, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri. Like I mentioned earlier, I think he's going to be one of those weekends where he's just slightly off the pace and he's not quite on the level of the top two. I still think it's going to be a good result for him and McLaren getting a nice podium. And, I think he's just going to be slightly off, so that'll put him on P3. But I still think he will be ahead of some of the other teams like Mercedes and Ferrari. So P2, I'm going with Lando Norris. I think it's going to be super tight, but I think the team in the form of McLaren won't be as sharp as they need to be to pull off a win against who I think is going to win the race. I think McLaren is still going through some growing pains, and the tighter it is, the more difficult it is for them to be able to make some of those close calls when it comes to strategy and during the race. I think it's going to come to bite them in this race. I don't think they're going to be quite as sharp as they need to be, and I think it's going to cost them the race. I think Lando Norris is going to do a good job. I don't think he's going to have any blunders or anything like that. Not necessarily lose out on the start either, but I think it's going to be McLaren that are letting down Norris, and because of that, I think, amongst other reasons, that P1 is going to be Max Verstappen. I think Verstappen is finally going to get back to winning ways for the first time since I believe it was Spain, which has been quite some time given his recent track record in Formula One since the new regulations in 2022. And I think that's going to be for three reasons actually. One, like I mentioned before, I think the team in the form of Red Bull is just always operating at a very high level operationally, and I think they'll be sharp, they'll make the right decisions, and that'll be a real difference maker in terms of who wins the race. Second, I think it's going to be the upgrades. I think Red Bull, with them bringing some big upgrades, I don't think they're going to completely fall back even farther. I don't think it's going to be the wrong upgrade. I don't have any reason to believe that they won't be able to make a step forward with the upgrades. And, they've gotten this far being as successful as they have been in these regulations by understanding them. So I think it will be a positive step for them. I don't think they're going to make a big jump to be absolutely outright the fastest car on the grid, but I think there will be either right there with McLaren, which they necessarily haven't been as of late, or they're going to be slightly ahead. I still think it's going to be incredibly close, but I think it will be a bit more positive for them with this upgrade package. Now, the constructors fight, I think that's completely gone. Just even if Red Bull does bring a solid upgrade package here, they would have to be monstrously better than McLaren to be able to recoup that. I think it's a 40-point gap now. Plus, with Red Bull being a one-man team versus McLaren having two drivers, that's a tough ask. But I think with Verstappen and Red Bull being at least thereabouts, Verstappen will definitely be able to hold on to the title. Now, my third reason for Verstappen winning the race is because the Circuit of the Americas has been resurfaced ahead of this race. That will almost certainly help Red Bull because there will be less bumps, and that has been a major problem for Red Bull in the past. We think back in times of like Imola and Singapore, with these tracks have a lot of bumps, have a lot of curbs. It caused a lot of problems for Red Bull in the past, and with this resurfacing, the track is going to be nice and smooth, and I think it's really going to benefit Red Bull. And between that and their upgrades, I think it's going to allow them to be able to just be able to be right on par with McLaren, and then I think they are going to be able to finally get back to winning ways at the US Grand Prix. For my masterclass of the weekend, I'm going to go with Williams. They had a double points finish last year. Granted, there was 2 disqualifications in the form of Leclerc and Hamilton that did help them, but even Logan Sargent scored a point last year, and they're even more competitive this year than they were last year. They actually have 2 really great drivers currently racing for them, so I think those things are all going to be beneficial for them to be able to score some points. And just overall, Williams is really on the up and up. They're making a lot of good progress, and I think it's going to be a strong weekend for them. So my disaster class of the weekend is going to be Sergio Perez. Sorry, Checo fans. I think he's going to be back on the back foot even more than he was in Singapore. I think Red Bull is going to be back at the front, and I think because of that, we're going to see the large gap to Verstappen again, and I think that's really going to cost Perez in the race. We saw when in the recent races, when Red Bull hasn't been as competitive, that Verstappen and Perez have been a little closer on track. But when the Red Bull is competitive, when it's doing what Verstappen wants it to do, then Verstappen is way clear. And I think that's pretty much what's going to happen. I think there's going to be a large deficit between Verstappen and Perez, and I think Perez is going to have a really poor weekend at a time where he really needs to be performing well if he has any hopes of keeping his 2025 seat. All right, now on to my bold prediction of the weekend. It is going to be that Lawson outqualifies Perez. Yes, I know the RB is kind of crap right now, but I think Perez is not going to have a good weekend, and I think it'll just be very poetic in a negative way for Perez, but in a positive way for the storylines of the season, that Lawson is going to be able to outqualify Perez. I don't think that's going to stay the same in the race, but I think there will be something surprising that happens there. I can imagine Perez getting knocked out in Q2 or Q3, and Lawson actually outqualifying him, which would make for absolute scenes, and it would, not look so good for Perez, but I have a feeling that's going to happen. I'm feeling pretty confident about it, so we'll see if my confidence remains true, if my prediction remains true throughout the weekend. Okay, so those are my predictions for the United States Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about my predictions. Am I completely wrong? Do you guys have differing opinions? Let me know down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please give the video a like and a subscribe if you're interested. You can also follow me on the social media platforms. I'm on X as Last to First Real, first spelled F1RST, on Instagram as Last to First. You can find me on all the major podcast platforms as Last to First, and also on YouTube as Last to First. I also have a blog at lasttofirst.wordpress.com. Once again, first spelled F1RST. So thank you all for tuning in to my predictions for the United States Grand Prix. I look forward to the rest of the season here. We have a lot of great things to dig into, so stay tuned for my race review and all of the future content I have coming. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.